I've been holding out for a good amount of time to talk about this show. It's honestly one of the things that made me want to try out the video essay format to begin with. The characters and story have been discussed to no end, philosophized, speculated, and most importantly, misinterpreted. There's really no end to the different ways I see people perceive this story and these characters, which honestly is cool as fuck, but let's be real, it's a bit oversaturated. Something that's under-discussed about the show, and honestly the film medium as a whole, is the other technical aspects that go into making the show as good as it is. In media arts, there's a lot more to focus on in terms of craftsmanship outside the story. And it's something I really like to delve into, especially in the context of Evangelion. Now, the animation has both rightfully been praised and rightfully been lambasted for its, kind of on and off quality. One second, you have unfinished crayon drawings, and then the next, you have one of the most amazingly well-done fight scenes ever done in animation ever. So yeah, the animation quality has been discussed plenty, both in the good and the bad. So what else is there? What am I going to talk about? Well, there's also the cinematography. That's also something that's very understated, considering Hideaki Anno's very distinct style. However, due to that very same distinct style, there has been a very slow surge of people who actually talk about and discuss the cinematography of Evangelion in depth, as well as Anno as a whole. So that's kind of covered. So, in this particular video, I'm going to be discussing something that I don't think anyone has ever talked about ever. And honestly, if someone has talked about this, link me to them. I'd love to watch more like this. And that topic is the editing, with a slight emphasis on its use of sound, because they kind of go hand in hand. Now, editing's not really something you consider when looking at an animated feature. Usually, all of the editing that's done in it is done in the pre-production stages, when all the timing and all the storyboarding is done. The only other director I can really think of who I'd really cite as a good editor for animation would be Satoshi Kon. And even then, it's the same case. Everything is done in pre-production. So how do I talk about editing in this context with it being interesting? Well, Evangelion's entire run is honestly able to hide a very, very minimal amount of movement through very tight, quick editing. And I could really go into the whole show with this, but I'm going to specifically focus on episode 1. Now, once again, this episode doesn't feature anything too egregious in the way of complex character animation, with the exception of some very clear standout cuts. The actual energy and momentum of the whole episode is carried by, well, you saw the fucking title, and what have I been going on about? The editing, my dude. So let's get fucking started. Evangelion has a very striking use of text, utilizing bold typefaces with impact font, as well as what I assume is the Japanese equivalent to it. Typography has a whole separate philosophy that I'm going to avoid talking about for the sake of me not knowing too much about typography. The silent still shot of text is suddenly interrupted by the camera panning rapidly over the ocean, punctuated by the use of a Dutch angle and a very punchy helicopter sound effect. And honestly, this cut is one zoom and a sound stinger short of being a horror movie edit. Like, this could easily be a jump scare if you had a couple other things to it. Oh fuck, water! The next shot slows down a little bit to give us more of an establishing shot of where the ocean fast pan we just saw was. The helicopter sound also appropriately dampening out to ease the tension of that very same first shot. The camera panning slows down as well. The final shot of this sequence introduces us to the angel swimming through the underwater city. The camera is no longer moving, but the angel is. And now we have a series of extremely detailed still shots of tanks. Military tech being one of director Hideaki Anno's favorite things, we're given time to soak in and appreciate the very sight of them. Now, let's stop for a second and break all this down, because not only was everything here technically well done, it also functions as a visual information dump. Starting with the basic rule of human psychology. Bad things come from the right, good things come from the left. That's why in Super Mario, Mario starts from the left and fights bad things coming from the right. We instantaneously have that psychological connection with the way the angel is introduced in constant movement from the right side. Whilst our last bastion of defense, these tanks right here, sits stoically on the left side awaiting its arrival. The use of general camera and character movement as well as sound gives us a general sense of panic and attentiveness. The helicopter having snapped you to attention after the silent text, your eyes are following the angel the same way the helicopter is. And the amount of on-screen movement slows down to a halt completely once we reach the tanks, only resuming again when this bird runs away from the oncoming attacker. Each shot is able to clue us in on the geography of what's happening. Our brain can therefore make a mental map of everything. From left to right, we have the tanks, the flooded city, the angel, and the helicopter. And that's all done without explicitly telling us anything. We have a complete idea of everything that's happening within the first 5
20
seconds of the show. Also, keep the concept of a mental geography map in mind later on, because that's going to be important later. For the sake of me not wanting to reuse this footage anymore, let's move on. The camera continues to pan from right to left, keeping the flow of location going. We can affirm that this oceanside city is not too far from the battle. The next series of shots continue to be slow and empty, although now we add a PA speaker whose volume levels and clarity change depending on our proximity to its off-screen speaker. With the speaker, we also get our first hints of dialogue. The dialogue finally cluing us into the fact that despite the city looking empty from all the shots, it's actually merely been evacuated. We now meet a faceless woman, Misato Katsuragi, who's looking for someone. The next cut shows us who she's looking for. The shots serve to set up the location one at a time. There's an abandoned city, and in that city there's a car, and in that car there's a girl, and that girl in that car is looking for this here boy. This here boy be Shinji Ikari. We know he's Shinji Ikari because he's being introduced to us via a literal fucking name tag. It should also be noted that Shinji is the first character whose face and eyes we actually see. Therefore, our first sense of humanity comes from this character. We now have someone to relate to and follow in this potentially perilous situation. Cutting from Misato to where Shinji is, outside of this bitch boy talking to himself, it's fairly silent. When the angel finally strikes, albeit off-screen, the initial fallout contrasts that silence just with very loud wind noises, which are then punctuated by cutting to rattling metal grates, which would be one of the loudest things possible in the situation. The more stress-inducing sounds die down a bit when we go to telephone wires, and then to just the dampening wind again. Through just clever use of locations in proxy to the sound design, the tension is created, apexes, and then settles. There's kind of a sense of, oh shit, what's gonna happen next, just through the use of sounds and the shot choices. Shinji turns around, and now we essentially enter his perspective, although not literally, as it's being displayed through a more cinematic wide shot than through an actual POV. Planes retreat from an off-screen pursuer. We can easily affirm they're retreating thanks to our earlier established sense of geography, as well as the left-right staging principle I discussed earlier. If Mario's running left, it's because he's running away. The angel's scale isn't the only thing showing its strength. The blocking and staging are as well. So, you taking notes, cause here's some fucking cliff notes for you. As an audience, through mostly visual information, we already know our setting, our antagonist, our protagonist, and the current situation. And that summarizes the last few minutes of me talking. The editing rhythm just keeps the whole thing flowing and moving at a nice pace, despite just using still shots like 80% of the time. Hard cut the text punctuated by a sync to intense music, which is then interrupted in rhythm with the song by an equally punchy sound of a missile flying in from behind the camera. The camera now follows the missiles, however trailing slightly behind to give them a sense of speed and kinetic energy. We only cut away for a brief reaction shot punctuated by a gasp. Soon as we cut back to the missiles, they're once again being tracked by the camera. The quick shot of Shinji not only clues us into his proximity to the location, it also serves as a cool way to cut from one perspective to the next while still keeping track of the movement all the way until it hits the angel. Logistically, it totally would have been a pain in the ass for them to paint a whole background that changes perspectives with the moving missile, and honestly, in modern day, this would have been a very vapid and boring 3D tracking shot, and really it would not have built tension the same way that the quick cutting here did. Like honestly, the limitations here that had to be worked around via editing end up building all the tension here. When the angel counterattacks the pilot, we never actually see the beam hit his plane. This is a trick a lot of animators use when doing fights, where they simply anticipate the action, and then instead of showing the impact, they cut to the overshoot of said impact. The character who was struck compensates for the skipped frame just by looking like he was hit. Same principle applies here, but with editing. The angel's beam anticipates to the point where it consumes the screen entirely, and then when we cut back, it's already gone through and is being pulled out, the plane crashing to the ground. We're once again reminded where Shinji stands in the frame by having the plane's movement down to the left complement its entrance to the top right. And if his location wasn't already clear, the angel now levitates and puts its foot down right next to Shinji, squishing the plane. I should also note we've been cutting to medium shots of Shinji's face frequently throughout the entire thing. And it's ironic that I say medium shots, because these quick reaction shots are the medium through which the audience can feel and experience things. Never dwelling on them too long as to interrupt the pacing of the battle, however, instead feeling like a natural part of it, and also occasionally subbing in for the anticipation overshoot idea I discussed before. We know a car pulls up off screen because we can hear one skidding in. Again, logistically, this saves the animator's time on a tedious and pointless movement. Theoretically, however, this is able to build up tension as to the mystery of who's driving in from off screen. Said mystery quickly builds up and then reveals it to be the girl from before. This tree panning by the firing plane works as a natural screen wipe to the next shot. In fact, this whole series of shots is just them sliding the cells around while using effects animations to keep things exciting and close-ups. You really don't think about that while you're watching it though, because the shots are constantly changing focus from the close-ups to the guns to the plane sliding to the angel getting bombed. Also, they don't animate the car much, but when they do, god damn, that looks good! At this point, I feel like I'd be repeating myself a lot, so I'm gonna skip around a bit now. Let's talk about a very specific thing. Excitement through the mundane via fast cutting. Edgar Wright famously utilizes this technique in Hot Fuzz for comedic effect, editing the basic job of paperwork to look like it's part of an action scene. Evangelion does something similar in this shot right here, where all this dude's doing is answering a phone. However, whereas Hot Fuzz uses this as a joke, this uses it to limit more complex animation while also retaining the mood with more stressful close-up shots. Phone rings, he swipes, he turns, he talks. The swipe then cut then turn is able to keep the momentum of the whole shot going without us ever actually having to see him pick up the phone. The same technique is used further on in the episode, where we see Ray being wheeled in. It's able to feel as urgent as possible by contrasting the calm music with a loud hospital bed wheel, and utilizing close-ups of things that imply her condition without showing her body in its entirety, saving that reveal for later when Shinji first sees her. Honestly, cutting the sound is even used just when characters are talking to each other. For the most part, the beats of each character's lines signify when to cut, with the exception of one particularly punchy scene and word. When Gendo and Shinji are arguing over whether or not he should pilot the Eva, the cutting momentum is ongoing. Framing Gendo above Shinji with the Eva literally coming between them visually says everything about the situation. Like, honestly, if you were to find a way to put a shot from this in an art gallery so people could, like, speculate about it, it would honestly probably be talked about as much as any other piece of high art. The shots cut in and out between wides and close-ups of one or the other, line by line. The framing changing depending on the subject at hand or the person speaking. The only time this cutting rhythm is broken is when Gendo says, "If you're going to do it now. If not, then leave." The note "leave" brings us to an extreme close-up of Shinji's eyes to make the words feel sharper along with his reaction, also bringing us directly into the window to that character's soul, the eyes. After cutting to reaction shots of everybody around him to build the all eyes on him pressure, we cut back to the Eva in front of him, reaffirming its status as a roadblock between him and his father. And I am legit gonna come full stop right now, because I am only skimming the surface. Like, I wrote four chicken scratch ass pages about this. It's an aspect of the anime I feel no one has really thought of in a comprehensive way, and it's something that really deserves to be put in the spotlight. When you're looking at an animated project or any kind of visual project, there's more to appreciate than just writing. Direction absolutely deserves to be acknowledged, especially when it's this on point. It's fairly infamous that by the show's end, Eva's budget and time management overwhelmed its director. His eyes were bigger than his stomach with the project this ambitious, and the drop in quality isn't even cleverly hidden by that endpoint. It's instead compensated for by an ending that would only really satisfy like 1/10 of the savants tenacious enough to decipher all of this on their first go. What? Don't look at me, I don't like it either. But I can't really complain. With the show having a fairly sloppy ending, we were able to get one of my favorite animated movies of all time as a makeup. By the way, I absolutely plan to do analysis videos of End of Eva. Like, holy shit, dude, I really like this movie. All in all, even in its earliest days, Eva's direction was able to show Anno's strength in several facets, before it all came tumbling down. And then skyrockets the par way the fuck back up with the movie. Like, goddamn, I don't even really like Eva that much, but I adore this movie and really want to talk about it.